Hello, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at 100 facts about Lethal Company, the indie horror co-op game that took the world completely by surprise. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and let's get into it. Fact 1. Lethal Company was made by a single person. The developer, known online as Zeekers, built, designed, programmed, and published the entire game alone. In an industry where even mid-sized titles require teams of dozens or hundreds of people, that's a remarkable thing to sit with. Fact 2. Zeekers started making games when he was just 10 years old. His very first experiments were small experiences built inside Roblox, which he began posting to his YouTube channel on May 29, 2012. The channel still exists today, and if you go back far enough, you can watch a 10-year-old learning how to make games in real time. Fact 3. By the time Lethal Company launched, Zeekers had already made 19 games. Most of them are small indie horror titles, many of which never found a wide audience. Lethal Company was his 20th game. Fact 4. Before moving to Unity and Steam, Zeekers spent several years developing horror games on Roblox. Titles like Silent Dark, Lightbulb, and They Breathe were among his most notable works from that era. He eventually grew frustrated with Roblox, noting in a 2016 tweet that the platform's constant updates kept breaking his games, and he was tired of fixing them. Fact 5. His first game on Steam was called It Steals, released in July of 2020. It was followed by Dead Cedar in February 2021, and then The Upturned in March 2022. All three received positive reviews, but none of them came anywhere close to the success that was quietly building. Fact 6. Lethal Company was formally announced on July 8, 2022, via a short YouTube teaser. The game was described at the time as a co-op horror roguelite about an abandoned industrial moon. It was a modest announcement for what would become anything but a modest game. Fact 7. The game launched into early access on October 23, 2023 for just $9.99. At that price point, it was accessible to almost anyone, which would prove to be a significant factor in how the game spread. Fact 8. Within weeks of launch, Lethal Company had reached over 100,000 concurrent players on Steam. By December 3, 2023, it had peaked at an all-time high of 240,817 players simultaneously, a number that remains extraordinary for a single developer indie title. Fact 9. Lethal Company became the highest-grossing game on Steam for the week of November 21st through 28th. 2023, sitting above free-to-play juggernauts like Counter-Strike 2 and Apex Legends, as well as premium releases like Cyberpunk 2077 and Call of Duty. For a $10 game made by one person, that is genuinely staggering. Fact 10. By the end of 2023, Lethal Company was the top-rated new release of the year on Steam, sitting at a 97.32% positive rating based on over 100,000 reviews. It ranked above Resident Evil 4, Baldur's Gate 3, and Hogwarts Legacy. Fact 11. By January 2024, Push to Talk, a gaming industry publication, estimated that Lethal Company had sold over 10 million copies and generated an estimated gross revenue of around $113 million. Zeekers was 21 years old at the time. Fact 12. The game won the Better With Friends award at the Steam Awards 2023. It was also nominated for Game of the Year. On February 14, 2024, it won Stream Game of the Year at the Streamer Awards, which speaks to just how large a role Twitch and YouTube played in spreading the game's popularity. Fact 13. The success of Lethal Company has been compared frequently to that of Phasmophobia, another co-op horror game that blew up largely through streaming and social media. The two games share a similar structure: friends, fear, proximity, voice chat, and things going very wrong. Fact 14. According to Zeekers himself, Lethal Company is, in his own words, a game about laughing at death. That phrase captures the tone of the game better than any review. Players die constantly, and they do it together, and somehow that makes it funny rather than frustrating. Fact 15. Originally, Lethal Company was conceived as a completely indoor game. There was no ship, there was no outdoor environment at all. The early concept had players arriving via elevator rather than a spacecraft, exploring purely interior spaces. The outdoor elements, the moons, the wide-open danger, all of that came later during development. Fact 16. The game is set in the year 2532. Humanity has been a spacefaring and colonizing civilization for several hundred years by the time the player takes their first job. The universe is described in-game as being located in a region of space called the Thistle Nebula, which may be part of a broader region known as the Fading Nebulae. Fact 17. The game's startup screen references a company called Halden Electronics Incorporated, with a copyright date ranging from 2084 to 2108. This gives the sense that the technology the player uses is hundreds of years old, salvaged, decaying equipment that has been passed down through generations of expendable workers. Fact 18. The company, the corporate entity the player works for, resides on a moon called Gordion, which is numbered 71 inches the game's system. Gordion is a notably unusual moon in that time does not pass while you are there. Players can land, sell their scrap, and purchase items without losing any quota deadline time. It is one of the only safe places in the game. Fact 19. Interestingly, the name Gordion has a historical root. In ancient history, Gordion was the capital city of Phrygia, where King Midas was said to have ruled. Whether this is an intentional reference by Zeekers to themes of greed and the value of gold fitting for a game entirely built around collecting and selling is left to the player to decide. Fact 20. The moons the player visits are all numbered rather than simply named. Experimentation is 41. Assurance is 220. Offense is 21. March is 61. Rend is 85. Dine is 7. Titan is 8. These numbers are not purely cosmetic, they exist within the game's broader lore as official designations within the Thistle Nebula's cataloging system. Fact 21. The three easier moons, Adamance, Vow, and March, are collectively known in the game's lore as the Green Witches. They orbit a gravitational center called No Service. Their ecosystems are lush compared to the barren industrial moons, and each of them had colonies that, according to the lore, mysteriously disappeared. Fact 22. Experimentation and Assurance are twin moons orbiting a gas giant called Big Grin. Offense, meanwhile, is described as an asteroid moon in the same system that splintered off from Assurance only several hundred years ago after being colonized. The idea of a moon literally breaking apart and being settled before it fully drifted away is a quietly unsettling detail buried in the game's background lore. Fact 23. The Moon 5, Embryon, is thought, according to lore, to be the testing grounds for the Old Birds, the large robotic entities the player encounters. The moon itself is hidden from the terminal until the player scans an old bird and reads its bestiary entry, where the moon's name is quietly revealed. Fact 24. 6-8, Artifice, one of the game's most dangerous moons, is described as having once been teeming with life. By the time the player arrives, it is entirely abandoned, scattered with weapons over 200 years old and classified technology that nobody seems to have come back to claim. Whatever happened there, it happened quickly enough that no one had time to leave properly. Fact 25. The hidden object found beneath the company building on Gordion, accessible through a hatch to the left of the landing zone, has the words "Don't Tell" painted on its side in red. The community has speculated at length about what it is. The slots on the side appear shaped to fit the apparatus item found on moons, which is also the power source for the building's employees enter. Whether this is intentional design or a coincidence has never been officially confirmed. Fact 26. When selling scrap at the company building, players ring a bell and a massive tentacle emerges from behind the counter to collect the goods. Nobody knows what creature that tentacle belongs to. The community has named it Jeb, for reasons that, much like the creature itself, remain entirely unclear. Fact 27. If the bell is rung too many times or too rapidly, the creature behind the counter becomes agitated. At that point, the tentacle will emerge and grab the nearest employee instead of the scrap. It is one of the few instances in the game where the entity that employs you can directly kill you. Fact 28. The entire story of the game, such as it is told through log entries left behind by a former employee named Sigurd. These logs are found on data chips scattered across the various moons and can be read on the ship's terminal by typing in the word Sigurd, which is helpfully written on a sticky note already on the ship when you begin. Fact 29. Sigurd's logs are dated 1968, 564 years before the game takes place in 2532. The idea that players are reading the diary entries of someone who died over 5 centuries ago and yet are living out nearly the same experiences is one of the game's most quietly haunting ideas. Fact 30. Sigurd's logs are full of spelling mistakes and typos. In the game's lore, this is attributed to the suits, making it difficult to type properly. Interestingly, If you read all the logs in order, the typos become less frequent over time, suggesting that Sigurd either grew more careful with the keyboard or simply stopped caring quite as much about appearances as the situation became more desperate. Fact 31. One of the most striking logs is written not by Sigurd, but by his crewmate Desmond. Unlike Sigurd's chaotic entries, Desmond's log is calm, careful, and encrypted. It reads, "It's all a guise. We're supposed to think it's all just a transaction, but our real job is keeping an incredible terror fed." It ends with him apologizing to whoever reads it and wishing them a good day, because, as he puts it, what else is there for us to do? Fact 32. Sigurd mentions in one of his logs that Desmond traced a voice calling them on the walkie-talkie and discovered it was coming from a group of people pretending to be the company, located somewhere across the entire solar system. Who those people are and why they are impersonating the company is never explained. Fact 33. Sigurd speculates in the same log that there might actually be a monster inside the company building, and that employees like him are essentially feeding it. The scrap in this reading isn't currency, it's food. This theory is supported by what players can observe at the counter, and by the general sense that the company has no real interest in keeping its employees alive. Fact 34. The skybox visible if players manage to clip above the fog layer on any moon is a photograph of a real location. A Reddit user traced the image to Sandton, a city in the Gauteng province of South Africa. Why Zeekers chose this particular spot, nobody knows. It just quietly exists up there, above the monsters and the fog, untouched. Fact 35. The Ghost Girl is unique among all the creatures in Lethal Company in that she cannot be scanned. Every other entity in the game can be observed and added to the bestiary. The Ghost Girl has no entry, no scientific name, no danger rating. She does not officially exist within the company's records. Fact 36. The Ghost Girl targets only one player at a time. If she appears to you, you are her target, and everyone else on your team can continue working as normal. She begins her haunt passively watching, flickering lights, giggling, before eventually beginning a proper chase indicated by her skipping toward you and the sound of heavy breathing. Fact 37. The Bracken, the tall, humanoid red creature with leaf-like protrusions along its spine, is one of the game's most behaviorally complex entities. Its scientific name is Rapax folium, which translates roughly from Latin as predatory leaf. It is a lone hunter with what the bestiary describes as high intelligence. It stalks players silently and will snap their neck from behind if not deterred. The correct way to deter it is to glance at it briefly and then look away. Direct eye contact makes it aggressive. Fact 38. The Bracken has a favorite room. After killing an employee, it will drag the body to a specific location deep in the facility, as far from the exit as possible. This is believed to be a kind of den or trophy room. Finding it means you have wandered very far from safety, and the Bracken has already been busy. Fact 39. When the Bracken dies, its body undergoes rapid decomposition, dissolving into small gray particles within seconds. The bestiary mentions this directly, and the game's death animation reflects it. There is no body to recover, no evidence left behind. Fact 40. The Coilhead has no scientific record in the bestiary. Sigurd's entry for it simply reads, "Insanius thingus, there's no freaking scientific record. Good luck, you know as much as us." We just call it the Jester. Though this refers to the Jester, the Coilhead's actual bestiary entry is labeled Vir Caligaris, and speculates that these creatures were manufactured as biological weapons of war, carrying dangerously high levels of radioactive particles and having been known to combust when dissected. Fact 41. The Coilhead stops moving when looked at directly. This is not, according to the bestiary, a hard and fast rule. It is simply the behavior most consistently observed. The suggestion that the rule has exceptions is never followed up on, and whether those exceptions are present in the game mechanically or simply implied by the writing is left deliberately unclear. Fact 42. Victims of the Coilhead lose their forearms and have their head detached, with a spring emerging from their neck. The bestiary notes that this raises questions about whether Coilheads reproduce by converting their victims into new Coilheads. It is listed as unconfirmed speculation. The game never confirms it. It simply puts the idea in your head and moves on. Fact 43. The eyeless dog's scientific name is Leocacus, and the bestiary refers to them as breathing lions for their large mouths and recognizable sound. They are completely blind and hunt entirely by sound. This means that using your microphone, dropping heavy items, or even having your walkie-talkie transmitting too loudly can attract them. They are genuinely responsive to the player's real-world voice. Fact 44. Eyeless dogs are social hunters that spread out far to cover distance, and when one finds prey, it roars to alert the others in a chain reaction. Despite their terrifying effectiveness, the bestiary notes they are characteristically clumsy and often take incorrect guesses at exactly where their prey is standing. Their strength is in numbers and persistence, not precision. Fact 45. The forest keepers, the enormous giants that patrol the outdoor areas of the more dangerous moons, share a common ancestor with the bracken, according to the bestiary. Their scientific name is Satyrid proceritas. Their bodies bear eye-like markings on their front and back, which function as visual deterrents for smaller creatures. The bestiary notes that forest keepers exhibit behavior similar to that of a human child around the age of 5 or 6, though what that behavior looks like on a creature capable of eating you in one motion is left to imagination. Fact 46. Forest keepers cannot hear. They rely entirely on sight. This means that staying behind them, staying still, or using the terrain to block their line of vision is far more effective than trying to be quiet. It is one of the more counterintuitive creature encounters in the game. The loud, enormous monster is the one you can actually sneak around. Fact 47. The Jester is perhaps the most feared creature in the game among experienced players. It appears as a small jack-in-the-box with spindly legs, winds itself up while pursuing players, and once fully wounded, pops open and enters an unkillable chase state. Sigurd's danger rating for it is 90%, accompanied by the note, "Get out of there before it goes ape. You can't hide from it, just evacuate." Fact 48. The hoarding bug behaves in a remarkably distinct way from the other creatures in the game. Rather than simply killing employees on sight, it becomes aggressive when it perceives its collected items as being threatened. It will carry scrap to a specific spot and guard it jealously, attacking anyone who comes too close. The bestiary describes it as having become deeply attached to whatever it decides to collect. Fact 49. Baboon hawks cannot fly despite having large wings. Their wings are simply too small relative to their body mass. Instead, the wings are used for intimidation displays and protection from the element's biological features that evolve for social performance rather than actual flight. The largest baboon hawk group ever recorded consisted of 18 individuals. Fact 50. Baboon hawks have been observed collecting shiny and colorful objects to mark their territory. They are, essentially, hoarders, which means that flashy scrap items left outside can attract their attention. They are also known to attack creatures twice their size, including eyeless dogs, when operating in large enough groups. And now, it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today, we're looking at the Lethal Company and Fortnite collaboration. In June 2024, Epic Games partnered with Zeekers to bring the game's iconic orange and black hazmat-suited player character, known as the Employee, into Fortnite as a purchasable skin. The crossover also included a stop sign harvesting tool, a back bling based on the character's oxygen tanks, and an emote called the Company Jig, which uses a modified version of Song 5 from the in-game boombox. Lethal Company is one of only a handful of indie games to ever receive a full cosmetic bundle in Fortnite. The Company Jig quickly flooded lobbies, and the community's reaction ranged from excitement to a few voices on the Steam forums who worried the collaboration would change the game's identity, which it did not. Fact 51. The spore lizard, called Lacerta glomerorum in the bestiary, is one of the few creatures in the game that is not inherently hostile. It is an herbivore with a poor bite despite its large mouth. The bulbs on its tail attract a specific species of fungus, which it can then shake to release spores defensively. This is described as a unique example of a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between the lizard and the fungus. Fact 52. Historical records referenced in the spore lizard's bestiary entry mention that humans once partially domesticated them. This effort was eventually abandoned in favor of harvesting their tails for medical purposes. The idea that the creatures players encounter were once companions to ancient human colonists, and that the relationship ended because their tails became commercially valuable, is a quietly sad detail. Fact 53. The tulip snake is listed as one of the game's harmless entities, but it has one notable behavior. Males of the species use large objects as part of their mating display, lifting rocks, plants, and other heavy items to impress potential mates. They are, according to the bestiary, capable of carrying objects at least twice their size. They have also been known to grab living creatures in this competitive frenzy, which is where the harmless classification begins to feel slightly generous. Fact 54. The old birds are robotic entities found on some of the harder moons. Their bestiary entry references them as being from a period of political conflict between human states, weapons developed for warfare that were never properly decommissioned. They are described as attacking any living creature they detect, which includes other monsters. The old bird is noted as being essentially unkillable under normal circumstances and is one of only a handful of entities that will actively target other monsters rather than exclusively hunting employees. Fact 55. The circuit bee referred to in the bestiary with an unsubtle appreciation for wordplay is a descendant of the honeybee that has evolved to generate electrical fields. When panicked or angered, it generates stronger electrical output. If its hive is stolen, the swarm will enter a prolonged attack state, targeting every living creature in the area until it either finds the hive or exhausts itself. The bestiary notes this has been known to leave behind fields of small animal bodies, and in rare cases, start fires. Sigurd's annotation in the bestiary entry reads, "Be baited." Fact 56. The nutcracker is, on the surface, a tall toy soldier. It patrols its territory with one working eye that can only detect movement. It also carries a shotgun, which it will use. What makes the nutcracker particularly interesting is that upon death, the player can pick up and use that same shotgun, making it one of the few creatures in the game whose defeat yields a meaningful weapon rather than just a moment of relief. Fact 57. Masks found in the game, the comedy and tragedy masks, will kill the player immediately if worn. There is no transformation, no delay. Putting the mask on is simply the end. The in-game note describes them as having been used in what are euphemistically called ceremonies. The masked entities, human-shaped creatures wearing these masks, are believed to have been employees who encountered them under different circumstances and were converted. Fact 58. The Earth Leviathan is never seen on foot. It burrows entirely underground, only visible on the ship's radar as a large moving dot, surfacing only to consume its prey. It is the largest entity in the game, described as a colossal worm-like creature. It targets players who are outdoors, roaring before it surfaces, though the sound is muffled by the dirt, giving only seconds of warning. Fact 59. The Hygridir, a gelatinous entity that slides along the floor of the facility, is the only creature in the entire game that cannot open interior doors. Every other entity in the game has the ability to move through door after door without issue. The Hygridir simply cannot, which gives it a very specific, containable threat profile. Unfortunately, the areas it does reach, it reaches completely, and it cannot be stunned. Fact 60. The bunker spider constructs webs that are genuinely interactive in the game's physics. Players can walk into them and become briefly slowed. The spider itself will retreat when attacked, but it will return. Its webs, once noticed, are actually useful as warning indicators. If you see a doorway full of webbing, the spider is almost certainly nearby. Fact 61. The snare flea, which attaches itself to players' heads and slowly suffocates them, has a notable weakness. If the player makes it outside, the flea immediately dies. It cannot survive outdoors. This means that any snare flea encounter near the facility entrance has a simple, if not entirely dignified solution, which is to run outside as quickly as possible. Fact 62. The manticoil is one of the most harmless entities in the game, a multi-winged, bird-like creature that simply flies around the moons doing nothing threatening. Its name suggests something far more dangerous than it is. Players who see manticoils flying peacefully overhead are being offered a moment of calm that the rest of the game rarely provides. Fact 63. The weather system in Lethal Company affects difficulty but not loot. Rain, storms, fog, flooding, and eclipses all make the experience harder, but they do not increase the value or quantity of the scrap on a moon. A stormy moon is simply a more dangerous moon, not a more rewarding one. The company does not compensate you for taking extra risk. Fact 64. During stormy weather, metallic items conduct lightning. If you are holding a shovel or certain pieces of scrap when you hear them beginning to spark, you have a narrow window to drop them before the bolt arrives. If the ship itself is struck by lightning, its power goes out entirely. Fact 65. The apparatus, an item that can be extracted from inside facilities, serves as the power source for the building itself. Removing it shuts off all power, which means all the lights go out, all the turrets deactivate, and all the hazards powered by electricity go dark. It is one of the most tactically interesting items in the game, and it also happens to be among the most valuable scrap the player can sell. Fact 66. Turrets in the facilities have a specific behavior pattern. They scan, they lock on, they fire. However, they can be navigated around if the player times their movement to the turret's sweep cycle. They can also be deactivated from the ship by a teammate monitoring the radar, who can toggle certain facility systems through the terminal. Fact 67. The ship's terminal is the player's connection to everything in the game. It allows routing to moons, purchasing items, accessing the bestiary, reading Sigurd's logs, and communicating with teammates. It also has a text-based command system with a few hidden inputs. Typing the word Sigurd opens the log archive. The game's manual, accessible early on, hides a number of small tips in its pages. Fact 68. The proximity voice chat system in Lethal Company is one of its most celebrated design decisions. Players can only hear each other if they are physically close enough in-game. This means that separating from your team means losing communication. It also means that anything you say out loud is heard by whatever happens to be near you, including eyeless dogs. Fact 69. The boombox is one of the most beloved items players can purchase for the ship. It plays music, it does nothing useful for survival, and it became central to the game's culture. The music that plays from the boombox, including the track that the Fortnite company Jig emote samples, became iconic in the game's community almost immediately. Fact 70. The ship itself can be decorated. Players can purchase furniture, suits, and cosmetic items using credits earned from selling scrap. None of these purchases improve survival odds in any meaningful way. They simply make the ship feel more like home, which, given the circumstances, is a quietly touching impulse. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're looking at something the community discovered embedded in the game's bestiary entries. Several creatures, the spore lizard, the coil head, the old bird, have bestiary entries that reference large-scale historical events, colonization efforts, domestication programs, weapons development for interplanetary wars. None of these events are ever depicted directly. They exist only as background details in creature files, the way a wildlife encyclopedia might reference an extinct relationship between humans and animals without ever explaining what happened to either side. It gives the universe of Lethal Company a sense of depth and history that the game never explicitly shows you. It simply implies that a great deal has happened and that you are arriving very late to all of it. Fact 71. The Moon 6-1. March is the only moon in the game with a fixed, unchanging interior layout. Every other moon can occasionally generate alternative layouts, swapping between the factory, the mansion, or the mineshaft types. March always generates the same layout. Whether this is a technical decision or a lore detail is not explained. Fact 72. The bridge on Vow can be broken permanently for a given run. If too much weight is carried over it too quickly, it collapses. There is a second bridge, but the primary route becomes unavailable for the rest of that visit. It is one of the few environmental hazards in the game that is caused entirely by the players themselves, with no monster involvement whatsoever. Fact 73. The mansion interior type, one of the three possible facility layouts, is visually distinct from the standard factory and features narrow corridors lined with bookshelves and decorative furnishings. It was likely once an inhabited structure, which raises quiet questions about who lived there, why they left, and why whatever is now inside stayed. Fact 74. The game generates new moons on a weekly basis through a challenge moon system. These moons are procedurally generated with random names and layouts, locked to a single visit with all scrap deleted at day's end. The best scores for each week's challenge moon are posted on a leaderboard. Fact 75. The number 7-1, Gordion the company's moon references Gordion, the ancient Phrygian capital. The numbers prefixing each moon name in the game are not purely decorative. They appear to be an official cataloging system used within the Thistle Nebula, suggesting a degree of bureaucratic organization to how humanity has mapped and claimed this part of space, even as the moons themselves have become abandoned, dangerous, and forgotten. Fact 76. The creature the community calls the Company Monster, the entity behind the counter at Gordion, has only one confirmed visual feature: its tentacle. Everything else about it is unknown. Its size, its appearance, whether it is a single creature or many, whether it is related to the voices and sounds heard through the walls, none of this is confirmed. Sigurd suspected it was being kept fed. Desmond believed the entire operation existed to keep it appeased. Fact 77. The voice that Sigurd hears on the walkie-talkie, the one that warns him about a monster inside the company building, is described as coming from a great distance. Desmond traced it to somewhere across the entire solar system. The identity of whoever is making those calls, and why they are warning employees of something they cannot help them escape, remains one of the game's unresolved mysteries. Fact 78. One of Sigurd's later logs is written by a crew member named Lucas, who describes being confused and scared, and is noted by Sigurd as not smelling like a monster, which Sigurd apparently considers a compliment worth noting. It is one of the few moments in the logs where you get a glimpse of the social texture of the crew and how they were simply trying to do a job and keep each other sane while everything around them became stranger. Fact 79. Zeekers built Lethal Company using the Unity game engine and distributed it through Steam. He has credited the accessibility of modern tools as central to how a single developer can produce a multiplayer horror game with working, networking, procedural elements, and a functioning progression loop tasks that would have required an entire company a decade earlier. Fact 80. The game's art style is deliberately lo-fi. The textures are low resolution, the models are simple, and the visual language is somewhere between a mid-90s industrial setting and something hand-built in a basement. This aesthetic was not a limitation, it was a choice. Zeekers actively refined his approach to texturing throughout development, and wrote on his Patreon about learning a more advanced method of texturing that used fewer polygons while achieving a cleaner look. Fact 81. The game is listed on Steam as having a mature content description, rather than an official age rating from ESRB or PEGI. Zeekers wrote the description himself, noting that player characters can die through various means including dismemberment and decapitation, and that players can use fictional medical drugs recklessly. This is one of the few places in the game's official materials where the tone shifts from corporate bureaucracy to something almost darkly humorous. Fact 82. Lethal Company is described as playable on the Steam Deck, though Valve notes it may require extra effort and that some functionality needs the touchscreen or virtual keyboard. Some controls are not fully mapped to the default controller configuration, reflecting the fact that the game was primarily built with keyboard and mouse in mind. Fact 83. The game received a major update that introduced vehicles, specifically a cruiser that can be driven across the outdoor terrain of moons. The community's reaction to the addition of a drivable car in what had previously been a tightly contained walking experience was largely enthusiastic. The car can be used to run over eyeless dogs, which seems to have been a feature rather than an oversight. Fact 84. The Maneater is one of the few creatures in the game with genuinely unusual health mechanics. It has only 5 hit points in its adult phase, but most sources of damage that are not an instant kill deal only 1 point. Combined with the fact that it begins its life cycle in a harmless infant state before becoming deadly, encounters with the Maneater have a specific arc that rewards observation. Fact 85. When Zeekers announced a temporary break from Lethal Company development in September 2024, the community's response was one of overwhelming support. He had been working on the game continuously, largely alone, for years by that point. A game that had sold over 10 million copies being maintained by a single developer is an extraordinary situation, and the break was widely seen as not only deserved but necessary. Fact 86. The release of a similar game called REPO in early 2025 was cited by Zeekers as directly inspiring him to return to development. He stated that seeing another game in the same space motivated him to continue his own work. He returned and released a significant update version, 70 inches June of 2025. Fact 87. The Lethal Company community produced one of the most prolific modding scenes of any indie game released in 2023. Mods added new creatures, new moons, new scrap items, UI improvements, additional player slots, and an enormous variety of cosmetic changes. The game's modding community existed and was active within days of launch, reflecting both the technical openness of the Unity platform and the enthusiasm of the player base. Fact 88. One of the most popular community additions was a mod that expanded the maximum number of players beyond the default 4. The base game supports up to 4 players, but mods allowing groups of 8, 12, or even more to play together became widely used, particularly among content creators looking for more chaotic and comedic moments. Fact 89. The game's official soundtrack, the music that plays from the boombox, the ambient tones of the ship, the sounds associated with specific creatures was composed entirely by Zeekers alongside the rest of the game. There was no outside composer. Every audio decision, from the haunting ambient drone of the facilities to the cheerful absurdity of Song 5, was made by the same person building the models and writing the code. Fact 90. The creature known as the Butler wears a suit and carries a broom, and while it is initially passive and almost domestic in appearance, it becomes aggressive when threatened and releases mask hornets upon death. The contrast between its appearance quiet, tidy, almost servile, and its actual behavior is one of the most tonally distinctive creature designs in the game. Fact 91. The Vein Shroud is among the newer additions to the creature roster and functions as an environmental camouflage hazard, disguising itself as part of the background until an employee is close enough. It is a design philosophy that the game returns to repeatedly. The most dangerous things are often the ones that don't initially look like anything at all. Fact 92. The giant sapsucker is an outdoor creature notable for its extreme aggression toward anything that enters its nesting area. It will attack and kill baboon hawks that attempt to steal its eggs, and will attack eyeless dogs that wander too close due to noise. Players have discovered that using a cruiser to trap it is one of the more creative ways to neutralize the threat. Fact 93. The game has no final boss, no credit sequence, and no definitive ending. Players simply continue taking jobs, meeting quotas, and eventually failing, at which point the game resets. There is no victory condition. This structure reflects Zeekers' stated intention. The game is about the loop, about the relationships within the crew, and about the accumulation of stories that come from repeatedly doing something dangerous together. Fact 94. The company does not care whether the player lives or dies. This is communicated through the game's mechanics more than through any cutscene or dialogue. When you die, your scrap is lost. The company still wants its quota met. There is no acknowledgement of your loss, no grace period, no apology. The corporate indifference to employee well-being is the game's primary horror concept, running beneath every creature encounter and every failed run. Fact 95. Zeekers released most of his pre-Lethal Company games on itch.io at very low prices, or free. Several are still available. Playing them in order gives a sense of someone methodically developing their craft, each game a little more refined than the last, each one exploring a slightly different angle on horror and atmosphere. Lethal Company did not emerge from nowhere, it emerged from a decade of practice. Fact 96. Zeekers has maintained a significant degree of personal privacy throughout his rise to prominence. His real identity has been shared in limited ways, and he has given very few interviews. He communicates primarily through game updates, his Patreon, and occasional social media posts. This privacy has not hurt his relationship with the community. If anything, it has added a quiet mystique to the figure behind the game. Fact 97. The game cost $9.99 at launch and remains at that price. It has not been raised. For a game that sold over 10 million copies and generated over $100 million in estimated gross revenue, the decision to keep the price low and accessible is one that Zeekers has never publicly walked back. Fact 98. The company the player works for has no backstory that is fully revealed. Its origins, its true purpose, whether it is run by humans or by something else entirely, none of this is answered. Desmond's log suggests the entire operation exists to feed something. Sigurd's log suggests there is more to the moons than simple salvage. The players are at the bottom of something much larger and much older, and the game trusts you to sit with that without resolution. Fact 99. The bestiary entries are written in a layered style. There is the formal scientific registered genus names, behavioral observations, ecological relationships, and then there are Sigurd's annotations written directly into the same entries. Informal and often alarmed. The two registers sit side by side throughout the bestiary, creating a document that is both a scientific field guide and a personal diary of increasing dread. Fact 100. And finally, when players log in on their very first day of a new save, the ship's terminal displays the date as Tuesday, July 3rd, 2532 at 8:03 inches the morning. It is the first thing you see, and it is strangely specific. You are a new employee. It is early morning. The moons are waiting. And somewhere out there, in the records that nobody reads anymore, Sigurd wrote his first log 564 years ago, beginning with, "Hello, I am writing this log to keep myself sane." And that's all 100. Thank you for spending this time with us. Sleep well, and try not to think too hard about what's behind that counter. Good night.